So you want to see my chest? The sultry alien voice catches Nolan Ward off guard, his face flushing as he stumbles over a response. He hadn't expected his first day on Komar to take such a turn. Nolan's arrival on the alien world marks a pivotal moment in human-Komarian relations. As a seasoned diplomat, he's no stranger to tense negotiations. But the stakes here are unprecedented. The success or failure of this trade deal could shape interstellar relations for generations. The bustling marketplace assaults Nolan's senses. Komarian citizens, their forearms and iridescent skin a stark reminder of their alien nature, push past him. The air thrums with unfamiliar languages and the scent of exotic spices. Nolan's eyes dart from stall to stall, taking in the vibrant displays of alien goods. A commotion catches his attention. A Komarian female struggles with a large crate, her prominent curves straining against her clothing. Without thinking, Nolan rushes to assist. His hands brush against her chest as he steadies the crate. He freezes, expecting outrage, but instead finds himself captivated by her curious gaze. "I'm Celeste," she introduces herself, her voice melodic and alluring. "Daughter of the Komarian trade minister." Nolan's heart races. He's just made physical contact with a high-ranking official's daughter. "I'm so sorry," he stammers. "I didn't mean to—" Celeste's laughter cuts him off. "Human customs are fascinating," she purrs. "Perhaps you can teach me more?" As they walk together, Nolan notices the suspicious glares from other Komarians. Celeste leans in close, her breath warm on his ear. "Humans are rare here," she explains. "There's been tension between our species." Nolan's mission suddenly feels more daunting. "Your father," he ventures. "Does he support the trade deal?" Celeste's expression darkens. "He fears human influence on our culture, but I find your species intriguing." She offers to show Nolan the city, her eyes sparkling with mischief. As they explore, she explains Komarian mating rituals involving the exchange of bioluminescent chest markings. Nolan's mind reels, trying to process the alien concept while maintaining his diplomatic composure. "Would you like to see mine?" Celeste asks, her tone both playful and provocative. Before Nolan can formulate a response, an ear-splitting alarm cuts through the air. Panic grips the crowd around them. "Solar storm," Celeste explains, grabbing Nolan's hand. "We need shelter. Now." She leads him to a nearby bunker, already packed with Komarians. They squeeze inside, bodies pressed close in the cramped space. Nolan feels Celeste's alien physiology against him, her extra arms wrapping around his waist for stability. The air grows thick with tension and unspoken desire. As the storm rages outside, Nolan becomes acutely aware of his precarious position. Whispers in the shelter speak of growing anti-human sentiment. He catches fragments of conversations, mentions of protests and political maneuvering against the trade deal. Celeste's lips brush his ear. "Meet me later," she whispers. "In private. I'll show you more of our culture. And perhaps more." Nolan's breath catches in his throat. The fate of human-Komarian relations may rest on his shoulders, and now he finds himself entangled in a web of alien politics and forbidden attraction. As the storm begins to subside, he knows he must choose his next steps carefully. The wrong move could ignite an interstellar incident or unlock the key to lasting peace. As the solar storm subsides, Nolan's heart races with anticipation. Celeste's invitation echoes in his mind, a siren call he can't ignore despite the potential consequences. With a deep breath, he makes his decision. Hours later, Nolan finds himself in a secluded Komarian garden, surrounded by alien flora that pulses with ethereal light. The air is thick with sweet, unfamiliar scents that make his head swim. Celeste emerges from the shadows, her forearms swaying gracefully as she approaches. "I'm glad you came," she says, her voice a melodic purr that sends shivers down Nolan's spine. "This place is incredible," Nolan breathes, his eyes darting from one bioluminescent plant to another. Celeste smiles, her iridescent skin shimmering in the garden's glow. "Let me show you our ways," she says, reaching for him with her lower set of arms. As they walk, Celeste explains the intricacies of Komarian customs, her words painting a picture of a culture both alien and beautiful. Nolan listens, enraptured, his diplomatic training kicking in as he mentally catalogs each detail. "And now," Celeste says, her tone shifting to something more intimate. As promised, she turns to face him, her hands moving to the fastenings of her garment. Nolan's breath catches in his throat as Celeste reveals her chest markings. They glow with an otherworldly light, pulsing in hypnotic patterns that seem to draw him in. "It's beautiful," Nolan whispers, mesmerized by the display. The moment shatters as a thunderous voice cuts through the garden. "What is the meaning of this?" Nolan spins to see an imposing Kamarian male storming towards them, his face contorted with fury. Celeste quickly covers herself, her expression a mix of defiance and fear. "Father, please," she begins, but Zorn cuts her off with a sharp gesture. "Silence," he roars, turning his rage on Nolan. "You dare to defile my daughter with your human presence? Leave now, before I have you arrested for this abomination." Nolan raises his hands placatingly, his diplomatic instincts kicking in. "Sir, I assure you there's been a misunderstanding." "Out!" Zorn bellows, his lower arms clenched into fists. With a last apologetic glance at Celeste, Nolan retreats from the garden. As he leaves, he hears Zorn berating his daughter, his words dripping with disdain for humans. The next day, Nolan enters the negotiation chamber with a heavy heart. The atmosphere crackles with tension as he takes his seat across from the Kamarian delegation. Zorn glares at him openly, his hostility palpable. As the talks begin, Nolan struggles to focus. His mind keeps drifting to Celeste, to the garden, to the potential fallout from their encounter. He forces himself to concentrate, knowing the importance of these negotiations. During a recess, Nolan steps out for some air. As he rounds a corner, he overhears hushed voices. He recognizes Zorn's distinctive timbre and edges closer, careful to remain hidden. "Frame the humans for the incident," Zorn is saying. "It will turn public opinion against them and scuttle the trade deal for good." Nolan's blood runs cold. He listens intently as Zorn and his conspirators outline their plan to sabotage the negotiations. As the group disperses, Nolan slips away, his mind racing. He needs to act fast, but he can't do it alone. There's only one person he can trust. Using every ounce of his covert training, Nolan manages to get a message to Celeste. They meet in a hidden alcove, the tension between them electric. Nolan quickly relays what he overheard. Celeste's eyes widen. "I knew my father opposed the deal, but this..." She shakes her head, her lower arms wrapping around herself protectively. "What can we do?" Nolan leans in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a cultural event tonight, right? High profile, lots of important people?" Celeste nods, a spark of understanding in her eyes. "You have a plan." As night falls, Nolan finds himself at the heart of Kamarian high society. The event hall thrums with alien music and conversation. He spots Celeste across the room, resplendent in formal attire that accentuates her alien beauty. Their eyes meet, and Celeste makes her way to him. "Are you ready?" she asks, extending her hand. Nolan takes a deep breath and nods. As the music changes, Celeste leads him onto the dance floor. The crowd parts, whispers rippling through the gathered Kamarians at the sight of a human joining their traditional dance. Celeste guides Nolan through the intricate steps, her forearms moving in perfect harmony. Nolan adapts quickly, his human movements adding an unexpected flair to the performance. The audience watches, initially skeptical, then increasingly captivated. Just as they begin to win over the crowd, a deafening explosion rocks the building. Chaos erupts as smoke fills the air and debris rains down. In the confusion, Nolan spots several Kamarians he recognizes from Zorn's group. They're planting something amidst the rubble. Acting on instinct, Nolan raises his voice above the din. "Everyone, please remain calm. Head to the exits in an orderly fashion." His words, delivered with practiced diplomatic authority, cut through the panic. As he guides the crowd to safety, he sees Celeste surreptitiously recording the true culprits with a small device. Zorn pushes his way to the front of the crowd, his face a mask of righteous anger. "This is the work of humans," he declares. "They seek to destroy our way of life." Before he can continue his tirade, Celeste steps forward. "Father, stop," she says, her voice ringing clear. "I have proof of what really happened here." She plays the recording, the images clearly showing Zorn's conspirators planning evidence. The gathered Comarians gasp in shock. As security forces arrive to restore order, Nolan finds himself at the center of a political storm. The failed plot has thrown Comarian society into turmoil, with long-held beliefs about humans suddenly called into question. Amidst the chaos, Nolan catches Celeste's eye. There's a world of unspoken words between them, a connection forged in the heat of crisis. But as the dust settles, Nolan knows that both the trade negotiations and his relationship with Celeste have entered uncharted territory. With Zorn's faction discredited but not defeated, and new questions arising about the true history between humans and Comarians, Nolan steels himself for the challenges ahead. The real work of bridging their two worlds has only just begun. The exposure of Zorn's plot had sent shockwaves through Comarian society, and the aftershocks were only intensifying. Nolan stood at the window of his secure quarters, watching as throngs of angry Comarians filled the streets below. Their chants echoed off the buildings, a cacophony of alien voices united in their distrust of humans. He clenched his fists, frustration mounting, as he realized the delicate diplomatic situation had devolved into chaos. A sharp knock at the door broke his concentration. He turned to see Celeste slip into the room, her forearms moving in agitated patterns. "We need to move," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anti-human sentiment is spreading faster than we anticipated. You're no longer safe here." Nolan's eyebrows shot up. "What about the rest of the human delegation?" Celeste shook her head. "They're being evacuated through official channels. But you're too high profile. We need a different approach." She gestured for him to follow, leading him to a hidden panel in the wall. As it slid open, revealing a dark passageway, Nolan hesitated. "Celeste, what exactly are you proposing?" Her iridescent skin flickered with emotion. "I'm risking everything by doing this, Nolan, but I believe it's our only chance to salvage the negotiations, and whatever this is between us." Heart pounding, Nolan nodded and stepped into the tunnel. Celeste sealed the entrance behind them, plunging them into darkness broken only by the soft bioluminescence of her skin. "These tunnels were built during an ancient war," Celeste explained as they navigated the twisting passages. "Most Comarians don't even know they exist." As they walked, Nolan found himself opening up about his life on Earth, his journey to becoming a diplomat. Celeste, in turn, shared stories of growing up as the daughter of a prominent official, the pressure to conform to Comarian ideals. "I've always felt different," she admitted, her lower arms wrapping around herself. "Drawn to the idea of other worlds, other cultures. My father saw it as a weakness." Nolan reached out, his hand brushing against one of hers. "I see it as a strength." Their eyes met in the dim light, a moment of connection interrupted by a sudden rumble. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the tunnel shook. "This way," Celeste urged, pulling Nolan down a side passage. "There's a chamber ahead where we can wait out the tremors." They stumbled into a vast underground room, and Nolan's jaw dropped. The chamber was filled with artifacts, their shapes unmistakably human in origin. "What is this place?" he breathed, moving to examine a corroded piece of machinery. Celeste's eyes were wide with shock. I don't know. This shouldn't be possible. Humans aren't supposed to have been here before the official first contact." Nolan's diplomatic training kicked in as he studied the artifacts. His fingers traced ancient markings, his mind racing to decipher their meaning. "Celeste," he said, his voice tight with excitement and trepidation, "I think this is evidence of an ancient treaty between our species, a treaty that was somehow broken." Before Celeste could respond, a new voice cut through the chamber. "Step away from the artifacts." They spun to see a group of young Comarians emerging from the shadows, weapons trained on them. At their head was a male whose skin pulsed with agitation. "Vex," Celeste gasped, "what are you doing here?" The leader, Vex, lowered his weapon slightly. "I could ask you the same thing, Celeste. You know this place is forbidden." Nolan raised his hand slowly. "We mean no harm. We stumbled upon this chamber by accident." Vex's eyes narrowed. "No accident. The tunnels guided you here because it was time." He turned to his companions. The prophecy speaks of this moment, a human and a Comorian united, rediscovering our shared past. As Vex explained their role as guardians of this secret history, Nolan's mind raced. The implications of this discovery were staggering, potentially reshaping the entire foundation of human-Comorian relations. "We need to make this public," Nolan said, turning to Celeste. "It could be the key to ending the current crisis." Celeste nodded, her expression determined. "The planetary assembly is tomorrow. If we can broadcast this evidence there, it might change everything." Vex stepped forward. "We've been waiting generations for this moment. We'll help you reach the assembly, but be warned. Your father has rallied his supporters. He plans to use the assembly to call for the permanent expulsion of all humans from Comar." Nolan felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes had just gotten exponentially higher. As they began to formulate a plan, he caught Celeste's eye. The connection between them had deepened, forged in the crucible of this shared discovery. They set out from the chamber, an unlikely alliance of human, Comorian, and rebels. The path to the assembly would be fraught with danger, but Nolan knew they had no choice. The future of two species hung in the balance, and time was running out. As they navigated the tunnels, the sound of the protests above grew louder. Nolan steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that every step brought them closer to a confrontation that would shape the destiny of both their worlds. Worlds. The future of two species hung in the balance, and time was running out. As they emerged from the tunnels into the bustling streets of the Comorian capital, Nolan and Celeste were immediately swept up in the chaos. The planetary assembly was already underway, and the air crackled with tension. Vex and his rebels melted into the crowd, providing covert support as Nolan and Celeste made their way to the Grand Assembly Hall. Security was tight, but Celeste's status as a diplomat's daughter granted them access. They slipped into the back of the cavernous chamber, just as Zorn took the podium. His voice boomed through the hall, amplified by advanced Comorian technology. "And so, esteemed members of the Assembly, I call for the immediate and permanent expulsion of all humans from Comar." A roar of approval rose from many of the gathered delegates. Nolan felt his heart sink, but Celeste squeezed his hand with two of hers, her touch steadying him. "Now," she whispered. They moved as one, pushing through the crowd towards the central platform. Vex's rebels had infiltrated the technical crew, and as Nolan and Celeste approached, the massive display screens flickered to life. Images of the hidden chamber filled the screens. Ancient human artifacts, Comorian relics, and unmistakable evidence of cooperation between their species. A hush fell over the assembly as Nolan stepped up to the podium, Celeste at his side. "Honored delegates," Nolan began, his voice clear and steady. "What you see before you is not a fabrication or a trick. It is our shared history, long buried but never forgotten." Celeste took over, her forearms moving in the graceful gestures of formal Comorian speech. "Our peoples were once allies, friends who worked together to overcome great challenges. This evidence proves that cooperation between humans and Comorians is not only possible but natural." Zorn lunged for the podium, his face contorted with rage, but security held him back. The assembly erupted into chaos as delegates argued, shouted, and demanded explanations. Over the next several hours, Nolan and Celeste presented their evidence, answered questions, and weathered accusations. By the time the session adjourned, it was clear that Comorian society had been irrevocably shaken. In the days that followed, Comar entered a period of intense political upheaval. The revelation of the ancient human-Comorian alliance sparked widespread debates and forced a re-evaluation of long-held beliefs. Nolan and Celeste found themselves at the center of this societal transformation, working tirelessly to bridge the gap between their species. They embarked on a planet-wide tour, visiting major Comorian cities to promote understanding and cooperation. In the sprawling port city of Jalkir, they addressed a crowd of thousands, their words translated and broadcast across the planet. "We stand here not as separate species, but as fellow sentients with a shared past, and hopefully a shared future," Nolan said, his voice carrying across the sea of alien faces. Celeste added, "Change is never easy, but together we can build something greater than either of our species could achieve alone. As they spoke, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. A group of Comarians surged forward, their skin pulsing with angry colors. "Traitors!" they shouted. "Human lovers!" Security moved to intercept them, but not before one of the protesters hurled a makeshift explosive device toward the stage. Nolan reacted instinctively, tackling Celeste to the ground as the device detonated overhead. In the chaos that followed, Nolan and Celeste were rushed to safety. As they huddled in a secure room, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, Celeste turned to Nolan. "Are you all right?" she asked, her lower arms checking him for injuries, while her upper arms steadied herself. Nolan nodded, his heart racing. "I'm fine. You?" Their eyes met, and suddenly the intensity of the moment overwhelmed them. Celeste leaned in, her alien features so familiar now, so dear. Their lips met in a kiss that transcended species, a moment of connection amidst the turmoil. As they pulled apart, both slightly dazed, a comm unit buzzed. The face of Vex appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "We've identified the leader of the attack," he said without preamble. "His name is Kraz, and he's gaining a following. You need to be careful." Over the next weeks, as Nolan and Celeste continued their tour, they learned more about Kraz and his movement. He preached a return to traditional Comarian values and complete isolation from other species, especially humans. His rhetoric played on fears of cultural contamination and loss of Comarian identity. In the northern city of Drellmore, Nolan and Celeste narrowly escaped another assassination attempt. As they fled through winding streets, Kraz's followers in hot pursuit, Celeste pulled Nolan into a hidden alcove. "This isn't working," she panted, her skin flickering with stress patterns. "We're just reacting, always on the defensive." Nolan nodded, his mind racing. "We need to change tactics. Instead of just presenting the facts, we need to show them what human-Comarian cooperation can achieve." They began to alter their approach, focusing on joint projects and cultural exchanges. In the agricultural hub of Fenlir, they worked alongside local farmers, demonstrating how human and Comarian agricultural techniques could be combined to increase yields. As they toiled in the fields under Komar's twin sons, Nolan found himself watching Celeste. Her forearms moved with fluid grace as she worked, her alien beauty enhanced by the joy she took in the task. He realized with a start that he had fallen in love with her, not despite their differences, but because of them. That night, as they sat beneath the stars, Nolan took Celeste's hand. "I think I'm in love with you," he said simply. Celeste's skin rippled with emotion. "I think I love you too," she replied. "But what does that mean for us, for our mission?" Before Nolan could respond, an urgent message came through. Vex's face appeared, his expression taut with worry. "We've uncovered something big," he said. "Kraz isn't working alone. He's in contact with a human extremist group. This goes deeper than we thought." Nolan and Celeste exchanged a look, their personal revelations pushed aside by this new threat. They knew their journey was just getting started, and the challenges ahead would test not only their mission, but their newfound love as well. As Komar's moons rose in the alien sky, Nolan and Celeste began to plan their next move, knowing that the fate of two worlds rested on their shoulders. The weight of their responsibility was immense, but the bond between them had grown stronger than ever. As dawn broke over Komar's alien landscape, Nolan and Celeste received an urgent communication from the planetary government. Their efforts to expose Kraz's conspiracy had not gone unnoticed, and public sentiment was shifting rapidly in favor of human-Comarian cooperation. "They want to capitalize on this momentum," Celeste explained, her skin pulsing with excitement as she read the message. "They're proposing a cultural exchange program, and they want us to lead it." Nolan's eyes widened. "Both of us?" Celeste nodded, her forearms moving in a gesture of affirmation. "You as the human liaison, me as the Comarian counterpart." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as they worked to organize a series of events showcasing both human and Comarian cultures. The arrival of a group of human scientists and diplomats marked the official start of the program. Among the new arrivals was Dr. Marcus Reed, a renowned xenobiologist whose reputation preceded him. Nolan watched as the scientist's eyes lit up upon meeting Celeste, his gaze fixed on her bioluminescent markings. "Fascinating," Dr. Reed murmured. "I've read about Comarian bioluminescence, but seeing it in person is truly remarkable." Celeste, ever the diplomat, smiled warmly. "Perhaps you'd like a closer look. We're planning a public demonstration tomorrow." The demonstration drew a large crowd, a mix of humans and Comarians alike. Nolan stood at the edge of the stage, his heart racing as Celeste stepped forward. She began to speak about the cultural significance of Comarian bioluminescence, her voice clear and confident. Then, with a deep breath, Celeste revealed her chest markings. The crowd gasped as intricate patterns of light danced across her skin, pulsing with a soft, otherworldly glow. Nolan found himself transfixed, a complex mix of emotions swirling within him. Pride in Celeste's grace and courage warred with a sudden irrational discomfort at seeing something he now considered intimate displayed so publicly. After the demonstration, Dr. Reed approached Celeste, his eyes shining with scientific curiosity. "That was extraordinary," he said. "I'd love to conduct a more thorough study of your bioluminescent properties. The potential applications for human medicine alone are staggering." Celeste agreed enthusiastically, but Nolan felt a knot forming in his stomach. He tried to shake off the feeling, reminding himself that this was exactly the kind of cross-species collaboration they were working towards. As the cultural exchange program progressed, Nolan found himself spending less time with Celeste. She was often in Dr. Reed's lab, participating in various experiments and scans. Nolan threw himself into his work, organizing events and mediating discussions between human and Comarian delegates, but he couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. One evening, as they were preparing for bed in their shared quarters, Nolan finally voiced his concerns. "Don't you think Dr. Reed's experiments are getting a bit excessive?" Celeste's skin flickered with surprise. "What do you mean? This is important work, Nolan. It's advancing human understanding of my species." "I know, but—" Nolan struggled to articulate his feelings without sounding jealous or possessive. "Some of these tests seem invasive. I worry about you." Celeste's expression softened. She reached out with two of her arms, gently cupping Nolan's face. "I appreciate your concern, but I can take care of myself. This is my choice, and it's important for our mission." Nolan nodded, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. His fears were realized the next day when Dr. Reed unveiled his latest proposal. "I believe we can push the boundaries of Comarian bioluminescence," he announced excitedly. "With the right stimuli, we might be able to amplify the effect tenfold, perhaps even harness it as an energy source." Celeste leaned forward intrigued, but Nolan felt the blood drain from his face as Dr. Reed outlined the procedure. It involved exposing Celeste to a series of high-energy particles with unknown risks to her physiology. "Absolutely not," Nolan interrupted, his voice sharp. "It's too dangerous. We have no idea what the long-term effects could be." Dr. Reed frowned. "With all due respect, Mr. Nolan, this is a scientific matter. The potential benefits far outweigh the minimal risks." "Minimal?" Nolan's voice rose. "You're talking about bombarding Celeste with untested radiation." Celeste stepped between them, her skin pulsing with agitation. "Nolan, please. This is my decision to make." The argument escalated, drawing the attention of nearby staff and delegates. Before long, news of the disagreement had spread, reaching the eager ears of the local media. As Nolan stormed out of the lab, he caught sight of a familiar face on a nearby view screen. Zorn, Celeste's father, was giving an interview, his expression grave. "This so-called cultural exchange has gone too far," Zorn declared. "They're treating our people like lab experiments. I call for an immediate termination of this program before more damage is done." Nolan's heart sank. Everything they had worked for was unraveling before his eyes. He knew he needed to act fast, but first, he had to make things right with Celeste. He found her in their quarters, her skin dim with conflicting emotions. As their eyes met, they both realized how much was at stake, not just for their mission, but for their relationship as well. "We need to fix this," Nolan said softly. Celeste nodded, reaching out to take his hand. Together, she agreed. As they began to formulate a plan, neither of them could have anticipated the ancient Comarian ritual that would soon test the very limits of their bond, or the dangers that lurked in the shadows, waiting to tear apart everything they had built. Built and endangered by their differences, as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, Nolan and Celeste set out to mend the fractures that had formed. They knew that their personal reconciliation was just the beginning. They needed a grand gesture to restore faith in human-Comarian cooperation. After intense discussions with both human and Comarian officials, they proposed a bold solution, a bonding ritual, an ancient Comarian tradition that would symbolically unite their two species. The ritual, long forgotten by most Comarians, was unearthed from historical records and would serve as a powerful demonstration of their commitment to unity. On the day of the ceremony, thousands gathered in the capital city's central plaza. Nolan and Celeste stood before the crowd, their hands intertwined, two of Celeste's lower arms grasping Nolan's. "Today we stand as one," Nolan began, his voice carrying across the hushed audience. "Not as human and Comarian, but as two beings committed to a shared future." Celeste's skin rippled with a soft, mesmerizing glow. "This ritual is more than mere symbolism. It is a promise, to each other and to all of you, that we will face our challenges together." As they spoke the ancient words of bonding, their bodies began to glow with a soft, pulsating light. The crowd gasped in awe as the light spread, enveloping them in a shimmering cocoon. When it faded, Nolan and Celeste stood transformed, their skin now bearing matching, intricate patterns that seemed to dance with bioluminescence. The successful ritual sparked a wave of support for human-Comarian cooperation. In the weeks that followed, plans for the first human settlement on Comar gained momentum. Nolan and Celeste found themselves at the helm of this ambitious project, tasked with overseeing its development from the ground up. Their first challenge was to scout potential locations for the settlement. They embarked on an expedition across Comar's varied landscapes, considering factors such as resource availability, environmental conditions, and proximity to existing Comarian populations. During their third week of exploration, as they traversed a remote mountainous region, Celeste's keen eyes spotted something unusual. "Nolan, look!" she exclaimed, pointing to a structure half hidden by dense vegetation. As they approached, they realized they had stumbled upon an abandoned Comarian outpost. The facility, though centuries old, was remarkably well preserved. Inside, they discovered advanced technology that had somehow withstood the test of time. "This is incredible," Nolan breathed, running his hand over a console that hummed to life at his touch. "These systems, they're like nothing I've ever seen." Celeste nodded, her forearms busy examining various artifacts. "And look at these historical records," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "They speak of the ancient human-Comarian alliance. This could change everything." As they delved deeper into the outpost's secrets, they uncovered evidence that humans and Comarians had once worked side by side, sharing knowledge and resources. The discovery sent shockwaves through both societies, reinvigorating interest in their shared history and providing valuable insights for the settlement project. However, not everyone welcomed this newfound connection. As news of the discovery spread, the Keeper, the enigmatic leader of the traditionalist faction, intensified his opposition to human presence on Comar. His followers launched a series of sabotage attempts against the settlement project, destroying equipment and disrupting supply lines. Nolan and Celeste found themselves working around the clock to mitigate the damage. One night, as they surveyed the wreckage of a destroyed communications array, Celeste noticed Nolan's exhaustion. "We can't keep going like this," she said softly, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We need to find a way to reach out to them, to make them understand." Nolan nodded, leaning into her touch. "You're right. But how do we get through to people who see us as a threat to their entire way of life?" Before Celeste could respond, their communicators buzzed with an urgent message. The Comarian government, concerned about the rising tensions, had implemented stricter security measures. All human activities on Comar would now be subject to increased scrutiny. Nolan felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew these new regulations would hamper the settlement project, potentially setting them back months. As he looked at Celeste, he saw his own concerns reflected in her eyes. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice firm despite the flicker of uncertainty in her bioluminescent patterns. "We've come too far to give up now." As they made their way back to the settlement site, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope. On one side, the promise of a harmonious future between humans and Comarians. On the other, the very real possibility that everything they had worked for could come crashing down. Little did they know that their greatest challenge was yet to come, as forces both seen and unseen conspired to test the limits of their bond and the future of human-Comarian relations. As tensions mounted, the situation at the proposed settlement site took a drastic turn for the worse. The attack came swiftly and without warning. Nolan and Celeste were reviewing construction plans when the first explosions rocked the facility. Alarms blared as smoke filled the corridors, and panicked shouts echoed through the complex. "It's the Keeper!" a Comarian technician cried out, her skin pulsing with fear. "They've breached the outer perimeter." Nolan's training kicked in. He grabbed Celeste's hand, pulling her towards the main research hub. "We need to secure the facility and protect our people," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. As they ran, more explosions shook the building. The air grew thick with acrid smoke, and the sounds of fighting grew closer. They reached the central command center to find it already crowded with frightened human and Comarian officials. "Seal all entrances," Nolan ordered, taking charge of the situation. "Celeste, can you access the security systems?" Celeste nodded, her forearms working in perfect synchronization as she interfaced with the facility's computers. "I'm activating emergency protocols now," she reported. "But our defenses won't hold for long against a sustained attack." Nolan surveyed the room, his mind racing. "We need to establish communication with the outside world. Does anyone have access to a long-range transmitter?" An elderly Comarian scientist stepped forward, his skin dimmed with worry. "There's an experimental quantum entanglement device in Lab 3. It's untested, but it might be our only hope." "I'll go," Nolan volunteered. "Celeste, stay here and coordinate our defenses." As Nolan sprinted through the corridors, dodging falling debris and sparking electrical systems, he could hear the sounds of the Keeper's followers trying to breach the facility. He found the lab and quickly located the device, a sleek silver cylinder humming with energy. Back in the command center, Nolan and Celeste worked feverishly to modify the quantum entanglement device, combining it with Comarian bioluminescent technology to boost its signal strength. The gathered officials watched in tense silence, the occasional explosion or shout from outside, a stark reminder of their precarious situation. "It's working!" Celeste exclaimed as the device came to life, projecting a holographic display. "We've established a connection with the Comarian capital." But before they could celebrate, a deafening crash echoed through the facility. The main doors had given way. "They're inside," Nolan said grimly. "We need a plan. Fast." Celeste's eyes widened suddenly, her skin pulsing with inspiration. "The outpost technology," she breathed. "Nolan, remember the bioluminescent systems we found? If we can modify them to create a large-scale light display..." Nolan caught on immediately. "We could disorient the attackers and possibly create an opening for escape." "Brilliant." They set to work immediately, Nolan's human ingenuity complementing Celeste's Comarian expertise. As they labored, the sounds of fighting grew ever closer. The makeshift barricades at the command center's entrance wouldn't hold much longer. "Almost there," Celeste muttered, her lower arms making final adjustments while her upper arms steadied the device. Nolan worked alongside her, their bodies close in the cramped space. Despite the dire circumstances, he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the soft glow of her skin, the determined set of her jaw. Their eyes met for a moment, a wealth of unspoken emotions passing between them. Without thinking, Nolan reached out, pulling Celeste into a fierce embrace. Their bioluminescent markings flared in unison, a dazzling display of light and color. "Whatever happens," Nolan whispered, "I'm glad you're here with me." Celeste's arms tightened around him. "Together," she affirmed. The moment was broken by a thunderous bang at the command center's door. "It's now or never," Nolan said, releasing Celeste and moving to the modified device. With a shared nod, they activated the bioluminescent array. The effect was immediate and stunning. Waves of light poured from the device, flooding the facility with pulsating colors and mesmerizing patterns. The intensity grew, spilling out through windows and cracks, bathing the entire area in a spectacular light show. Through the command center's view screens, they watched as the Keeper's forces stumbled, disoriented by the unexpected display. But more surprising was the gathering crowd of curious Komarians from nearby settlements, drawn by the unprecedented light show. "It's working," Celeste exclaimed. "The additional bystanders are creating a buffer between us and the attackers." Nolan seized the opportunity. "I'll lead a team to secure an escape route," he said, already moving toward the door. "Celeste, coordinate with the officials here. Make sure everyone gets out safely." As Nolan prepared to venture into the chaos outside, he cast one last look at Celeste. Her skin glowed with grit and something else, a warmth that made his heart race. With a deep breath, he stepped out to face whatever challenges awaited, knowing that together they had a chance to turn this crisis into a new beginning for humans and Komarians alike. As the chaos subsided and the immediate threat from the Keeper's forces waned, Nolan and Celeste found themselves thrust into a new challenge that would test the limits of their bond and the future of human-Komarian relations. Word spread quickly through official channels. A community of human-Komarian hybrid children had been discovered in a remote region of Komar. The news sent shockwaves through both Earth and Komar, igniting fierce debates about the implications of interspecies breeding. Nolan and Celeste were summoned to an emergency meeting with high-ranking officials from both planets. The tension in the room was palpable as they entered, their matching bioluminescent patterns pulsing softly in the dim light. "We need you two to lead a joint expedition to investigate this hybrid community," announced the Komarian Prime Minister, her skin flickering with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Your unique bond makes you the ideal candidates to approach these children and integrate them into our societies." Nolan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We'll do whatever it takes to ensure a peaceful resolution," he said, glancing at Celeste. She squeezed his hand with one of her lower arms, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by those present. As they prepared for the journey, Nolan and Celeste found themselves reflecting on their own relationship. They worked side by side, packing supplies and reviewing mission parameters, their movements in perfect sync. "Do you ever wonder?" Nolan began, his voice trailing off as he struggled to find the right words. Celeste paused, her forearms stilling. "About us?" she finished, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to a soft, warm glow. Nolan nodded, meeting her eyes. "These hybrid children, they represent a future I never thought possible, a future that maybe we could—" Before he could finish, their communicators buzzed with an urgent message. It was time to depart. The journey to the remote region was long and arduous. They traveled through dense jungles and across vast plains, the landscape of Komar unfolding before them in all its alien beauty. As they neared their destination, anticipation built within the expedition team. Finally, they crested a hill and saw it, a thriving settlement nestled in a lush valley. The architecture was a fascinating blend of human and Komarian styles, organic shapes mixed with geometric precision. As they approached, a group of children emerged to greet them. Nolan and Celeste gasped in unison. The children were a perfect fusion of both species. Some had forearms like Komarians, while others displayed the typical human form. But all of them bore intricate bioluminescent patterns that danced across their skin. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, stepped forward. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light as she spoke, her voice a melodious blend of human and Komarian tones. "Welcome," she said, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "We've been waiting for you." Nolan knelt down to meet her at eye level, his own bioluminescent markings pulsing in response to hers. "We're here as friends," he said softly. "We want to learn from you and help in any way we can." The girl nodded, then turned to Celeste. With a gesture that brought tears to Celeste's eyes, the child reached out and took one of her hands in each of her own 4 hands. The connection was immediate and profound, their bioluminescent patterns synchronizing in a dazzling display. As the expedition team was led into the settlement, Nolan and Celeste exchanged a look of wonder. They had expected to find a struggling community in need of assistance. Instead, they discovered a thriving society that had successfully blended the best aspects of both human and Comorian cultures. The hybrid children moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, their enhanced strength and agility evident in every motion. But it was their control over their bioluminescence that truly amazed the observers. The children used their glowing patterns to communicate complex ideas without words, creating living works of art with their bodies. Dr. Reed, the expedition's lead scientist, was beside himself with excitement. "This is unprecedented," he exclaimed, his instruments whirring as he took readings. "The genetic implications alone could revolutionize our understanding of both species." As they settled in for their first night in the hybrid community, Nolan and Celeste found a moment alone. They stood on a balcony overlooking the village, the bioluminescent glow of the inhabitants, creating a breathtaking tapestry of light below. "It's beautiful," Celeste murmured, her lower arms encircling Nolan's waist, while her upper arms gesticulated towards the view. Nolan nodded, pulling her closer. "It's more than that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's hope, for all of us." As they watched the living light show below, both knew that their journey was just the beginning. The discovery of this hybrid community would have far-reaching consequences for both Earth and Comar. But in that moment, holding each other under the alien sky, Nolan and Celeste felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did they know that their greatest test was yet to come, as forces both on Earth and Comar were already moving to either exploit or destroy this newfound bridge between their species.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.